Everywhere you look online, from videos to articles, the narrative is the same. Generation Z is getting poorer. It's easy to point the finger and say it's because Gen Z is lazy, entitled, or simply not having enough children to sustain the future. Some even warn that a population collapse is on the horizon. But is this really the case? Is Generation Z just squandering all their money on overpriced lattes and the latest iPhone? The reality is far from what these shallow accusations suggest. When you look deeper, the real reason why Generation Z is struggling has nothing to do with laziness or entitlement. It's about the massive economic forces that are pushing them further into poverty. This isn't a band-aid issue. This is a massive, systemic problem that has been brewing for years. The harsh truth? Generation Z simply can't work more than 12 hours a day and make ends meet. How is it that, in the past, a person could get a job with just a high school diploma and afford a large house, a stay-at-home spouse, and a few kids, all on a single income? What happened in such a short time that now, the idea of a normal life feels like a distant dream? For most in Gen Z, basic survival is a struggle, and it's getting harder by the day. The gap between past generations' living standards and what Gen Z is facing today is staggering. To truly understand this crisis, we need to look back at history. Back in the day, higher education was a guaranteed way to climb the social ladder. But today, it's a financial black hole. College tuition in the US has skyrocketed. In the last 20 years alone, tuition costs have doubled. And when you factor in inflation, they've jumped more than 200%. What baby boomers paid for college in the 80s, around $10,000, adjusted for 2018, has ballooned to nearly $26,000 for Generation Z, just for tuition alone. And that's before you even consider rent, administration fees, books, or food. The result? Crushing debt. Student loans have become the weight that Gen Z carries from the moment they step foot into university. Even if you manage to secure a scholarship or excel academically, many still walk out of college burdened by loans that stay with them forever, even if they declare bankruptcy. It's a financial trap that doesn't let go. And all of this for what? A degree that doesn't guarantee a decent job. In fact, for many, it doesn't even guarantee an entry-level position. Let's face it, college degrees are no longer a direct pathway to success. They don't open doors to careers. They don't ensure financial stability. In fact, many graduates are struggling to cover even the most basic daily expenses. The reality? Universities are becoming less and less viable for many. Without enrolling in highly competitive, career-focused courses, the return on investment simply isn't there. Then there's the workplace. For Gen Z, entering the workforce has been nothing short of a culture shock. They're expected to do jobs they never imagined, all while being told they need work experience they can't gain unless they're already working. And even though the media keeps shouting about job openings, for Gen Z, finding a job has never been harder. Hundreds of applications sent, and still, the door remains shut. Today, applying for jobs has become a soul-crushing experience. It's not uncommon for Generation Z to send out dozens, even hundreds, of applications without getting a single interview. This wasn't always the case. Decades ago, even in times of job shortages, getting hired was much simpler. Back then, basic advice like dressing well and filling out your CV properly often guaranteed you a foot in the door. Just showing persistence, like asking for a manager's time, could be enough to land you a job. But now, things have changed, and not for the better. One of the major shifts has been the rising bar for entry. Before the year 2000, a college degree practically guaranteed you a solid job. For other generations, this was the ticket to a better life. But for Generation Z, things have taken a sharp turn. A degree is now the minimum requirement, not a guarantee of anything. Instead of companies fighting to recruit graduates, they now focus on the top percent, leaving the rest to scramble. And the most disheartening part, even for entry-level roles, employers now expect years of experience. The world of recruitment has also drastically changed. In the past, companies would hire through local events, word of mouth, or physical job postings, keeping competition manageable and the process more personal. But today, a single job listing can attract thousands of applicants, all vying for the same position. The days of personal connections and local hires are gone. Instead, it's now a numbers game where quantity trumps quality. This has mirrored trends in modern dating, too, where technology has turned personal connections into data-driven interactions. Whether in the job market or dating apps, Generation Z faces the same heightened competition, where the illusion of endless options has made everything feel impersonal and dehumanizing. It's harder than ever to find a job, let alone support a family. But that's not all. In recent years, automation has made things even more difficult. Companies now use applicant tracking systems, ATS, software designed to filter out candidates based on specific criteria like keywords, experience, or location. What was once meant to simplify hiring has now become a barrier for millions. Many CVs never even make it to the eyes of a human. They're just discarded by the system because they don't meet the narrow parameters. Standing out has become a game of trickery. Applicants are now forced to tailor their CVs for every job posting, mimicking keywords and avoiding formatting issues that could confuse the ATS software. It's a tedious and demoralizing process, and it often feels like rejection emails are just part of the routine. Yet, at the same time, we're bombarded on social media with images of wealthy millionaires living it up in places like Dubai. How are they doing it? The use of AI has only made things worse. Hiring processes are now even more automated, with AI systems further eliminating human judgment. Companies are prioritizing efficiency over personal connection, reducing applicants to mere data points. The result? A hiring landscape that feels cold, impersonal, and downright unfair. Job hunting has always been tough, but today's reality is dehumanizing. Gone are the days when you could be given a chance to make a personal impression in an interview. Now, the only time you get that chance is if you're fortunate enough to even make it past the automated filters. For Generation Z, finding meaningful work and building a future has never felt more out of reach. In today's job market, data has become the deciding factor. Even the smallest explanation for gaps in your CV gets lost in the system, tossed aside, and added to the rejected pile. Worse, many companies now rely on systems that only pick up specific words, leaving applicants to play a game of keyword match. The competition has never been fiercer, and even the format of your CV can work against you. If the system can't read it, you're out. Then there's the issue with job advertisements. Companies often continue posting listings for positions they've already filled. Or worse, they advertise jobs when they already have someone in mind. You think you have a shot, only to realize the game was rigged from the start. And if by some miracle you do get selected, don't get too excited. The next hurdle? A questionnaire designed to test your obedience. Companies now want employees who won't challenge their rules or expectations. But if that wasn't enough, here's the harsh reality for Generation Z. AI is on the rise, ready to replace many jobs. And let's face it, things aren't looking up in other areas either. Generation Z is the first generation to face a world where they've been systematically weakened on all fronts, bombarded by estrogenic chemicals from plastics, junk food, and even everyday products. They become one of the weakest and least energetic generations in history. But there's hope, and it comes in the form of NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, a derivative of the B vitamin niacin. NMN has been shown to dramatically improve health and longevity by serving as a precursor to NAD+, a compound crucial for energy production, muscle regeneration, metabolism, and gene expression. With age, NAD+ levels naturally fall at a rate of about 1% per year. By the time you reach 50, you've got about half of the NAD+ you had in your youth. Let me step aside and let the doctor who discovered this explain it further in a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience. What we're talking about are the genes that help us recover from deterioration and disease. They're like the Pentagon, sensing when we're hungry, when we're exercising, and they send out the troops to defend us. We think these genes are responsible for the effects of dieting and exercise. This means we can now mimic that effect with molecules. NMN has been dubbed the limitless pill, and it can take 10 to 20 years off you. It's like the fountain of youth in a bottle. But here's the kicker. The FDA is trying to keep it away from us. Why? Because a healthy, strong population is harder to control. They're trying to change the status of NMN to classify it as a drug, which would allow pharmaceutical companies to control it. This move has nothing to do with efficacy or safety. It's about cornering the market and taking it away from you. A weak population is easier to control, so get it while you still can. Black for All Supplements has got you covered. And as our sponsor, they're offering a special deal. Buy 2, get 1 free for the next 48 hours. Stock up now. Now let's talk about wages, or the lack thereof. Wages have flatlined for the past 20 years, with the average hourly earnings in 2024 still the same as they were in 1978. That was during an economic downturn. Yet today, even as costs for living, housing, and everything else skyrocket, wages have not kept up. This has made it harder for Generation Z to live independently. More and more young adults are staying with their parents for as long as they can, and it's not because they want to. In 2023, nearly 45% of American adults aged 18 to 29 were living at home, the highest rate since the 1940s. This used to be seen as something unusual, but now it's becoming the norm. In the UK, it's not much better. 1 in 3 males and 1 in 4 females aged 20 to 34 still live with their parents. The cost of living has hit hard. Food alone costs an average of $4,500 per year per person, and that's just the basics. It's no wonder more young people are feeling trapped in a cycle they can't seem to escape. For millennials, the financial strain was significant in the early 2000s, but Generation Z is facing a far worse reality. The average annual cost for food alone has skyrocketed by 22%, reaching around $5,500 per person. That's an extra burden that most simply cannot afford. The massive debt burden on Generation Z has left them with little room to start a life of their own. It's not just about affording a place to live. It's about the reality that by the time they reach adulthood, many are still unable to live independently. The dream of getting married, buying a house, and starting a family feels out of reach. It's not just unrealistic, it's impossible without 2 salaries just to sustain the basics. Yet, even with 2 incomes, many still struggle. This is because wages have stagnated, leaving people with little to no buying power. And as rental costs continue to rise, it becomes painfully clear housing affordability has dramatically shifted over the years. Back in the 1970s, the average cost of a home was around $23,000, which, adjusted for inflation, would be around $150,000 today. But now, homes are averaging $400,000, nearly 3 times that amount. This is why baby boomers could buy homes with ease. After just a few years in a job, they could afford to buy a house. But today, for Generation Z, the situation is entirely different. The general rule of thumb used to be that you could afford a home if the monthly mortgage payment was no more than 30% of your income. But for today's young people, most end up paying 50% or more of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. And it's not just the mortgage. There's insurance, maintenance, property taxes, and countless other hidden costs that add up. Owning a home is no longer an achievement. It's a financial burden. As the population grows, so too does the demand for housing, turning it into a seller's market. This leaves most young people priced out of buying a home until they are at least 50 years old. In the meantime, they're stuck paying rent, often never owning anything of value. And landlords, they know they hold the cards. With so many potential renters, they have no incentive to lower prices. Now, renting comes with hidden fees that add up, fees that most of Generation Z don't even anticipate. Many have no choice but to share homes just to keep costs manageable. But even that isn't enough. In places like New York, the average rent is a staggering $4,000 per month, and that's before adding in utilities. A salary of $100,000 might seem like a lot, but in cities with a high cost of living, it's hardly enough to make ends meet. Generation Z is feeling the brunt of this, starting at the bottom of the ladder, burdened with massive debt and facing a job market that offers little in return. Add inflation to the mix, and it becomes clear building wealth for Generation Z feels like an endless battle. They're stuck in a cycle not of financial growth, but of financial survival. In just the last 2 years, inflation has drastically reduced purchasing power, leaving young people with 86% less financial flexibility than baby boomers had. This means they must choose between saving or spending on necessities like groceries, gas, and utilities. While GDP growth and economic policies might indicate things are improving, few people can actually feel the difference. Most of the benefits are being enjoyed by older generations who already have wealth tied up in real estate and the stock market. For Generation Z, however, the picture is entirely different, with stagnant wages, rising debt, and increasing difficulty of entering the job market. It's no wonder that debt levels are rising at unprecedented rates. Between 2021 and 2023, individuals aged 18 to 26 saw a staggering 179% increase in their overall debt burden, the largest surge among all generations. A significant portion of this debt comes from student loans. By 2022, 36% of older Generation Z had student debt, with an average balance of $20,000. In comparison, millennials at the same age had a lower rate of student debt, and those in 2006 faced less of a financial burden. This suggests that Generation Z is carrying a heavier load earlier in life. Given all these financial pressures, it's no surprise that Generation Z is increasingly relying on credit just to make ends meet. The financial outlook is grim, and for many, it feels like they're stuck in a system designed to keep them in debt. A significant portion of this debt is tied to student loans. By 2022, 36% of older Generation Z individuals were carrying student debt, with an average balance of $20,000. In comparison, older millennials and individuals from the same age group in 2006 had a lower incidence of student debt and smaller average balances. This suggests that Generation Z is shouldering a much heavier financial burden earlier in life, a fact that isn't surprising when considering all the other factors at play. As a result, many are increasingly turning to credit to manage these financial challenges. By the end of 2023, 84% of credit-active Generation Z consumers had at least one general-purpose credit card, a significant increase from the 61% of millennials at the same age a decade ago. Unfortunately, these credit cards often come with higher interest rates, further deepening the financial strain. It's clear that many in Generation Z are struggling to manage their debt effectively, which only adds to the mounting pressure they face. When people criticize Generation Z for being lazy or entitled, they miss a critical point. It's not laziness to want a coffee or to own an iPhone if you can barely afford to survive. This isn't about apathy or a lack of ambition. It's about the crushing weight of financial realities that make it difficult to care about anything other than getting by. Employee confidence, morale, and birth rates are all declining globally, with Generation Z standing out as the demographic with the lowest levels of job satisfaction. Only 44% of Generation Z report feeling engaged with their work, compared to 67% of older workers. This trend is reflected in phenomena like quiet quitting and bare minimum Mondays. But these are just symptoms of a much deeper societal issue: widespread discontent and stagnation. As this dissatisfaction grows, it's no surprise that fertility rates are also dropping. In the US, the birth rate recently hit a historic low of 1.62 children per woman, far below the 2.1 needed to sustain a stable population. These two interconnected trends, job dissatisfaction and declining birth rates, highlight a larger generational and economic shift. The traditional corporate model no longer resonates with Generation Z, especially when they can't even afford basic necessities. This has led to a staggering 60% of bosses reporting that they've had to let go of Generation Z employees who prioritize flexible schedules and higher pay. This trend is not unique to the US. In the UK, over 40% of workers under 25 are considering leaving their jobs due to burnout and a lack of career advancement. This reflects the broader cultural shift away from traditional life milestones like starting families and having children. How can society expect Generation Z to raise large, happy families when the cost of raising a child is approximately $300,000 by age 17, excluding college expenses? In the UK, childcare alone consumes over 20% of household income, making parenting increasingly unattainable for all but the wealthy. High student debt, stagnant wages, and unaffordable housing are compounding these challenges, discouraging job satisfaction and making family life seem out of reach. In 2003, 83% of people expressed a desire to become parents, but by today, that number has dropped to just 51%. This shift is not just a Generation Z issue, it's indicative of broader economic forces at work. The economic consequences of these trends will be far-reaching. Fewer young people entering the workforce exacerbates existing labor shortages, particularly in aging societies like Japan, where nearly 30% of the population is over 65. This imbalance puts additional financial pressure on workers, inflates taxes, and reduces benefits, which destabilizes economies further. Businesses face shrinking consumer bases and rising costs, which slow growth and threaten long-term stability. Efforts to reverse these trends, such as family incentives and generous parental leave policies in countries like France, Japan, and Taiwan, have had limited success. Cultural and systemic barriers remain, illustrating that financial support alone cannot solve these issues. Generation Z's focus on work-life balance, mental health, and flexibility must be integrated into future policy solutions. Workplace strategies must be implemented to foster greater engagement and address the underlying challenges. If Generation Z is struggling to make ends meet on their own, how could they ever afford to support a family? The financial burden is already overwhelming, and the idea of raising children is an even more daunting prospect. The current home-to-income ratio, which in some Western countries ranges from 6 to 8 years and can even stretch to 14 years, makes it incredibly difficult for young people to establish financial independence. In contrast, baby boomers in 1988 had a home-to-income ratio of just 4 years. Historically, home prices were about 5 times the annual income. But today, these ratios exceed even the 2008 housing bubble levels. In the UK, home-to-income ratios have been above 7 for over a decade, recently reaching a staggering 9. This situation is rapidly spiraling out of control. Given these conditions, how will this affect our future? Could this be the beginning of a population collapse? When we look at the US in 2023, the situation becomes clearer. Instead of a large population of children poised to replace the aging adult population, the reverse is now true. Despite significant declines in child mortality over the past few decades, falling birth rates over the last 50 years have taken their toll, resulting in a population with more middle-aged and elderly individuals than children. The chart depicting this demographic shift will likely be even more alarming in 20 years. While we can predict these trends with relative accuracy, the reality of living through them will be far more shocking. Aging populations and declining birth rates are significant challenges that societies must confront, and we don't need to imagine what these issues will look like. They are already unfolding. It is now predicted that over 20 developed nations will see their populations have before 2100. The historical impact of such a demographic collapse would be as severe as any major historical crisis, such as the plagues. While future generations may benefit from the eventual solutions, we will bear the brunt of the immediate fallout. As a result, we can expect governments to squeeze as much work as possible from the population to address the scarcity. Corporations and governments may push for extreme working conditions and longer hours, similar to what we see in places like South Korea. It's a potential reality we'll have to resist if we want to avoid it. Throughout history, every generation has faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. Men have been conscripted to fight in brutal wars, endured plagues, and lived through the hardships of economic depressions. These past struggles would make any modern complaints seem insignificant. But the issues we face today, especially the existential threat posed by demographic collapse, are unlike anything before. This is why governments and corporations are frantically working to address the looming crisis. In the United States, all 50 states have birth rates below the replacement rate, even in states like Utah, traditionally known for higher fertility rates. Iran, Italy, and South Korea are also experiencing similar declines, despite their vastly different cultures. To address this crisis, we must look at the root causes, most of which stem from the severe financial challenges Generation Z faces today. This makes them poorer than any generation in modern history.